We are performers.
We are artists.
Audiences.
Teachers.
Students.
We're curious.
Joyful.
Brave.
We make change.
We are Live Arts Miami.
Fueled
by learning
and curiosity.
Inspired
by possibility.
A celebration
of the imagination.
Unleashed.
An action-driven,
people-centered platform.
Committed to true inclusion,
equity,
and the creative process.
A people stage.
Uplifted
by the voices it uplifts.
Where art
is synonymous
with freedom.
Your local source
for global
live arts culture
at the crossroads
of Miami
and the world.
For 30 years
and counting.
Live Arts Miami.
Your stage.
Your stage.
Your stage.
Your stage for creating change.
Hello, and welcome to week 4 of Shimmy Shift Pivot, the weekly webinar series produced by Hanan Arts and Live Arts Miami, where artists, academics, and other thought leaders percolate, ruminate, and trouble social justice issues through the lens of the arts. I'm Gina Margillo, and I sit on the board of Hanan Arts, and today we will be examining the legacy of and the contribution of Maya Deren, one of the most influential figures in the avant-garde cinema world. She was a choreographer, an academic, and a poet, and was also a priestess in the Haitian voodoo tradition. We have a fantastic panel of artists today. Let's just jump right into introductions. I'm going to start with Nejla Yatkin, dancer, filmmaker, whom the New York Times has described as a magician, telling tales and creating worlds, and a fierce and supple performer. She's a Chicago-based choreographer who travels the globe inspiring empathic connections between people and their environments. Nejla hails from Germany, and her artistic lineage enfolds European dance tradition, modern African American dance, and modern American dance. Welcome, Nejla, from Chicago. We also have Dinorah de Jesus Rodriguez, filmmaker based here in Miami. Dinorah is an artist from Miami and Havana, and whose work features handcrafted 16mm digital video and rudimentary projections, often using elementary and outdated technology. And her works have included expanded cinema visual art and installation. Welcome, Dinorah. And of course, we have our esteemed Tiffany Madera, founder of Hanan Arts, director of Hanan Arts, who uses traditional rock sharky Egyptian dance as a tool for empowerment and social justice. Tiffany's a performer, a professor, museum professional, and a filmmaker whose work is informed by her Afro-Cuban and Chinese lineage. So let's just jump right in. Our subject matter is the enigmatic Maya Deren. As a choreographer, we're going to roll a clip. We're going to start with a clip from Maya. She once wrote, "In film, I can make the world dance." And that's exactly what she did. She was born in Kiev in 1917. That's Maya there. And she came to the United States at age 5 in 1922, having fled the pogroms in the Ukraine. She studied political science and journalism at NYU in 1936 and went on to get a master's degree in literature from Smith College. When she began making films in the 1940s, it was really rare for women to become filmmakers. She died at the age of 44 in New York, but she left a small but hugely important body of work. Right now, we're watching Ritual in Transfigured Time, one of my favorite pieces from Maya. This is her. That was Anais Nin that we just saw earlier. This is her fourth film, where she was concentrating on social dynamics and the art of greeting. Maya had worked alongside, but had not danced with the Katherine Dunham Dance Company. She worked as an administrative assistant, but she was heavily influenced by Katherine Dunham, whose principal dancer is actually in this film. We'll talk a little bit more about their collaboration in a minute. Here we see Rita Christiani entering a room where Maya unwinds. She's unwinding wool from a loom. Christiani enters a party, and you can see that her movement becomes the fluid performance of Maya Deren's choreography. So, panelists, let's talk about, as we watch a piece of this film, let's talk about Maya Deren's influence on your work. Dinorah. You're on mute.
There are two things in, and I've been, of course, reading The Essential Deren all these days in preparation for this. There's two things in here that I think are kind of really define the way that Maya's influenced my work from its very beginning. And one is here where she says, "The trouble with most films is that they are written, whereas cinematic thinking is another process altogether." So that, for me, is very, very true. I've never written a screenplay in my life, and I've made about 40 films. So that whole working of the film as a visual cinematic thing that is not necessarily a story or anything that has to be written down. And then here's another thing where she talks about meshes of the afternoon. And she talks about the sequence in meshes, where the footsteps are traversing different terrain. And she talks about that sequence, and she kept saying, it was like a crack letting the light of another world gleam through. I kept saying to myself, the walls of this room are solid, except right there. That leads to something. There's a door there leading to something. I've got to get it open, because through there, I can go through to someplace instead of leaving here by the same way that I came. And so I did, prying at it until my fingers were bleeding, and so came to the world where the identity of movement spans and transcends all time and space. The principle that the dynamic of movement in film is stronger than anything else. is where she arrived at. And where that led her to was to her film, which is my favorite of hers, and that is A Study in Choreography for the Camera. So I think those two concepts, the idea that movement is what film is about, that is what it is, and that it can and does exist in this place that is not a written verbal place of logistic thinking.
Yeah, and I think also she really introduced the idea of vertical filmmaking, which is the art of exposing the interior world as well as the external world, which I think you also do in your films. Should we show a clip of Jurame? And
yeah,
maybe you
I
can
think
tell
in
us.
Jurame, you'll see quite a bit, actually, especially from that scene. You'll see quite a bit of Maya's influence in my work. This is a collaboration with Cuban choreographer and dancer Rosario Cárdenas. She's a National Dance Award winner in Cuba, and she's almost 70 and still dancing. So yeah, and you definitely see that, you know, Maya has been shaping my work from a long way back.
So tell us, as we roll this, very much Meshes in the Afternoon.
It's all over. I mean, I don't think I have to say anything. If you've ever seen Maya Deren's work, you look at this and you think, oh, wow, she's just like, and of course, as I told you the other day in our interview, Maya and I had the same birthday. So I think in some ways we think and see the world similarly. You know, again, I think that maybe what happened to her was similar to what happened to me. Was I wanted to be a dancer, but my body wasn't doing it. So my inner world became a dancer, and this is how I dance. You know,
beautiful. And this is your most recent work.
This is my most recent work. I've just completed this about 3 months ago. Yeah, and it's opening at a festival in Colombia with Phoenix. So
which we'll show in a minute.
A collaboration that Tiffany and I have together. Both of those are going to be premiering at the Imagen en Movimiento Festival in Colombia.
Wonderful. Nejla, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about Maya Deren's influence on your work.
Talk about flow. I was during the summer thinking about a piece called Dreaming with Maya, and how I came to that was through Mary Wigman's Witch Dance. And so I was reimagining during the pandemic and before the pandemic in 2019, I started a work called The Other Witch, which is a reimagining of Mary Wigman's Hexentons. And somehow after I finished that piece, it was during the pandemic, I turned it into, instead of a live performance, into a 3-part film to share with the audience. And during my sort of research in film dance on camera, I'm also on panels for judging dance on camera. So I've been sort of floating in and out of her world, Maya Deren's world, because she's considered the mother of dance on camera in a way. And she was also the first woman who moved the camera. And so all that thematic preoccupation with the human body, its movement in the process of filmmaking is so exciting to me. And so I've been living with her, but then another interesting aspect why I was connected with her work was also that she worked with Catherine Dunham and Tally Beatty. And when I came to the United States in 1995, I also danced in works of Tally Beatty and also worked with Catherine Dunham before she passed away in the early 2000s. But it was kind of interesting that she worked with Catherine Dunham and Tally Beatty in their height of their careers, and I worked at the end of their careers with them. And so there was that lineage and connection also there with that. And I just appreciate Maya Deren's way of creating these dreamlike scenes and then floating from one into another and giving you unexpected ways to see reality. And so, yeah, that's how I connect to Maya.
Here where we are seeing the piece that you just described, The Other Witch.
Yeah, this is the ephemeral one. I have the hidden one, the ephemeral one, and the ancient one. So this is the...
And this is also, from what year is this work?
This just premiered in 2020 at the Dance Center in Columbia College. I was supported by the Chicago Dance Makers Forum. And then it went on virtual tour to India. It was performed in Hyderabad. And now I'm going to go actually perform it live in about a week in Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic, for a contemporary dance festival. And this was a reimagining of Mary Wigman's Witch Dance, which was also created during the first pandemic, during World War I and World War II. So it was also kind of spooky for me to connect to Mary Wigman the year before the pandemic hit here, sort of almost like a foreshadowing of times to come. And so in Mary Wigman's Witch Dance, she was also working with Gestalten im Raum, she called it, like figures in space. And so it's more about these figures in space that kind of talk to the collective consciousness. And so I was playing with that. And then asking what would my witch be like today. Sort of, she used it for representing a witch and the other, the outcast, with a Japanese no mask, and so mine was a sparkling, seductive mask that had multiple eyes. That it sort of like talks to our time of we are seen, but also we see so many things, and there is no real sort of categorized enemy. Like in the old days, it was like, okay, Britain is enemy with France, and France is enemy with Germany, and Germany sort of, you had clear definitions of who was your enemy during World War I, and now it's so kind of elusive in a way. There are these threats that happen, but we have so much information that all the information dilutes sort of the focus of how can we work as a society, a better society.
Beautiful. So as we mentioned earlier, Maya, aside from being an avant-garde filmmaker, had taken up the study, the academic study. She received a grant actually from the Guggenheim Fellowship to go to Haiti, really to study dance. And again, following in the footsteps of Catherine Dunham, who had also written a book, Island Possessed, about Haitian culture. And she took 18 hours of footage that has become a film that her husband has gone on to edit after her death, The Divine Horseman, and write a very esteemed book, The Divine Horseman, The Living Gods of Haiti. And it's very interesting as a European academic, European based in the United States, how she did become a priestess in the Haitian tradition, Haitian voodoo rituals, and wrote some groundbreaking ethnographic work. So I know that probably if this were happening today, it might not, it might be more controversial, but I wanted to get your take on that work. But I would also like you to touch on your ethnic and cultural identities and how you have also represented yourself, been represented, or how expectations of your culture might have influenced your work and your career. Dinorah?
You know, I studied with Trinh Minh Ha, who is a Vietnamese artist. She's a documentary filmmaker, a classical composer, and an academician. And she wrote Woman, Native, Other. And it is a book that I really recommend to anyone who wants to talk about ethnography and all these subjects of appropriation and how do you work in a culture outside of your own. So Minha has a series of documentaries that she made when she was traveling in Senegal and West Africa. And she's Vietnamese. And the whole gist of these documentaries as she's making them is, and you know, she is very much about sort of deconstructing classic anthropology, which is where Maya, because I'm not getting off the subject of Maya. Maya was an anthropologist. I mean, Maya's book, The Divine Horseman, this is an anthropological text. So, you know, as a scholar of anthropology, I mean, that was what you did. You went to another country and you wrote about it. What Minha questions many years later is, how do you do that? Like, what's the correct way to do that? How do you look at the other? You know, and Minha's premise is you look at yourself as the other. You are the other. You're in their space. So, so I think that is the conversation. You know, I don't know if that was happening at the time in 1953 when Maya was writing Divine Horseman. You know, and especially when the film was made, and she did not finish the film. The film was finished by Ito, her husband. So when you watch the film, you're watching a classic anthropological ethnographic documentary with, you know, a white male voice narrating, explaining what's going on. And her explanations of what's going on, me not being Haitian, but being Cuban, which is an adjacent culture with a lot of similarities, I see that the way she explains things in her book is very similar to the way that Santeria rituals are explained in the book El Monte by Lidia Cabrera, who is, again, another outsider who's coming in and writing about this culture that she, and again, Lidia Cabrera ended up becoming initiated and all of that. So it's anthropology. I mean, as an artist, I am not the one that gets to say what's right and wrong in anthropology. But I will say that, yeah, Maya was a twofold story. She was the story of an artist, and she was the story of an anthropologist. And where that anthropologist and artist come together, you know, we see, I think, the influences of her travels and her curiosity in her work. You know, I mean, when you look at the diverse casts in her films in 1940 something, you know, the fact that she chose Charlie Weedy, who was a Black dancer, that just wasn't the norm. So, you know, she was already sort of, and then this whole Catherine Dunham connection, which I think maybe our next panel should be on Catherine Dunham, because honestly, she's so important in this story that I think we almost don't even have time to cover that mega thing.
And Dinorah, that's definitely part of the context, because I think there's been decades of scholarship trying to interrogate the gaps in anthropology and ethnography, and also looking historically at the history of contemporary dance. And I know Nejla could speak more about how Denishan and other, you know, contemporary dancers from previous generations were also dancing the other and looking at the other, and how now do we grapple with these topics of appropriation and how to bring in the geopolitical context of the time and the historical frame and not letting people off the hook. And in the work that I do around North African dance, we have a lot of concern around the Orientalism, right? And Orientalism as this frame and this imperialistic gaze that has gone into the study of these indigenous folkloric dances. And, part of the connection that I feel to Maya Deren and to the panel is when I saw Nejla's work in Miami deconstructing Matahari, and her work on deconstruction and her work on deconstructing Orientalism and being so curious and inspired by the way she's telling the story. And so to answer, Gina's last question, as a Cuban American based in Miami in this global South city and doing a North African dance, I also study Afro-Cuban dance and other dances, but really the preoccupation I have felt about how to responsibly, ethically collaborate with North African dance and be in dialogue with all of these interrogations of history, right? With history and how we've learned about the dance, the ethnography of the dance, and then telling those stories now.
It's a perfect segue to the question that I wanted to pose to Nejla was, if you could explain your heritage and the work that you ended up doing and how you ended up representing so many other cultures by default. And then we'll show the Matahari clip in a minute.
Yeah, for me, it's also been kind of interesting growing up to see that the Western cultures always sort of trying to go back and trying to find themselves, trying to find freedom in the, like they say, primitive or the ancient. So I feel like the West has lost something that they are in search of. And you don't see anybody from Africa going around and documenting like cultures around the world. It's like the Europeans, and why is that? Is also the question. And growing up in Berlin, Germany, I was in the midst of this Western culture growing up as a Turkish woman from the mountains of Anatolia and coming from a nomadic tribal community. My parents grew up, I think, like a century. The time they grew up in was almost like a century before what I grew up in, because they had no electricity, they had no modern life, no streets. They were wandering every summer for 3 months to the mountains. So everything was very much connected to nature and how we live and survive in nature is what we have. And me, on the other hand, I grew up the first 3 years in that situation of nature and wandering nomadically in the summers and living in tents, then going as a 4-year-old and living in Berlin with traffic and electricity and abundance, but then also seeing the difference of the West is not happy with how they are living. They're like disconnected to nature, disconnected to who they are, disconnected to I don't know what it is. But then when you look at the dance history, it's also women trying to find freedom. And so they go and look into ancient cultures to find themselves, to find empowerment. And so a lot of the early modern dancers just try to imagine what an Egyptian dance would look like and exoticized it. And then in the early, like in the 20s and 30s, then like people like Mary Wigman took concepts of like Indian philosophy and Sufism and others, and breath control, and added that into these abstract concepts of going back to your anima and your natural state, and then how would you move in your natural state with the breath. And so all that kind of me growing up with these different styles. I grew up with Turkish folk dance, and Turkish folk dance, as you know, comes from the Ottoman Empire. And in the Ottoman Empire, they also occupied so many tribes and brought them under the Ottoman Empire. And so the Turkish tradition is very rich and very diverse in what kind of dances, and they have different regions. So I grew up with that. And then I connected to modern dance, and I kind of met in the middle because it informed the ancient, but also brought me into my own time period. And so I feel like I have this broad perspective, but I can include different things with sensitivity and a narrative that has both perspectives, like the East and the West, the primitive and the more cultured way in the West, that they say. So that's how I kind of, and then growing up also in Berlin, I was the first Turkish immigrant woman doing modern dance. It was not supported in the culture, in the Turkish culture, for a woman to be performing. So I kind of found my freedom and my independence in that, connecting to contemporary dance and modern dance. But then in the modern dance world, people did not see me as a Turkish woman. They saw me as the other from maybe Brazil. Oh, she can't be Turkish because Turkish women don't dance. And or they saw me as African American. So I ended up doing a lot of African American roles in Germany because there were no people of color, but there were also a lot of choreographers who had moved from the United States to live in Germany, Black choreographers who wanted to have who wanted to work with dancers of color, but they didn't have access. So I ended up doing a lot of, because I was a woman of color.
Right.
And I even danced Josephine Baker. Like nowadays, if I would do Josephine Baker, it would be an uproar during these times. But then coming to the US, it was because I was curious what people saw in me as connecting to the Black culture. And so I wanted to come and learn from African American choreographers to understand the connection of like the past and the future, and how you combine stylistically and how you tell your story. And so that was my into here. And then in the African American community, I was the exotic. So in every situation, I'm always the other.
Yes. So we are rolling a clip from Mata Hari right now. And, you know, I just encourage all of you to speak about this piece, which was apparently made an incredible splash when it was shown in Miami. Tiffany, Dinorah, comments about Mata Hari?
It was lovely. It was lovely to meet Nejla at that time, to see the work. I loved her integration of multimedia. That was when I was just beginning to start dabbling in media design for stage, and I saw how she was using it, and that influenced how I went on to use it in other works with Jenny Lin, with Lucia Arataya, with Niurka Marquez, with the many dancers that I've worked with.
This is your film. This is your film.
Yes, and I also made this clip for her.
Wonderful.
When she was here. So Yeah, that was wonderful. And you know what? Everybody who has ever been asked if they were Brazilian, please raise your hand.
Even me.
Okay. Because really, at the end of the day, they fix it all with like, "Are you Brazilian?" So,
yeah, many roads lead to Brazil, and one of the things that I loved about the Mata Hari show, Jenny Lynn, who was one of the producers at the time, she called me in and she's like, "We need the entire belly dance community to see this performance." And we were there. I mean, we were deep, we rolled deep for the performance. And for me, it was so pivotal to my development, because what I saw Nejla do is really tell a story with high aesthetics and interrogate Orientalism and be, fully embodied in the storytelling and bring a level, right? So bringing in a level that I wanted to reach and to bring the work and the visions that I had around the Raksharki, the ballet dance that I did. And, it helped me think through Orientalism and the othering, right? So there's self-othering, there's the othering that we are just subject to around the world and all the structures that we enter in. And then how to think, in my case, how to think about Sharki dance and the history of it and how it evolved from a social folk dance with women, amongst women, into a stage crafted performance style.
Wonderful. I'd like to show a clip from Dinorah's piece, Phoenix, in which, Tiffany, you're featured.
Mine and Tiffany's piece, yes.
Roll, yes. Collaboration is beautiful. If you could roll that clip. Yeah. And Dinorah, if you could each talk about it.
Well, we had been talking for years about working together, and it was kind of like, let's see when the universe deems that to be the case. And it happened at a time when both of us were going through such big changes in our lives. And it was the pandemic, and it was so all of this. And, I said, "Tiffany, I'm gonna put you through the fire, baby, because I see that that's where you're at." And so the whole concept of Phoenix came, and the idea that both of us were going through this sort of cleansing in our lives, and I want to say this about Phoenix. I didn't shoot this film. Tiffany came to me with lots of footage that was shot by different photographers that have worked with her. And so I'm the editor here, and I'm putting together all this footage. And I just felt like it was a ritual. This film is a ritual.
And going back to the word deconstruction, right? So there is original footage that Dinorah did shoot that's part of the story.
Right. A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, if we go towards the end, this is one part of it. But also it was this idea of deconstruction. So the deconstruction of the belly dance, deconstruction of myself, and this deconstruction of who we are and what we're becoming in this pandemic. Like, our bodies are changing, everything is changing. How are we reacting? And this idea of a phoenix that rises, from the flames into transcendence and ascendance. And, myself as, being a Scorpio, which is, my tattoo and part of this archetype, this rising from the ashes is part of the archetypal frames, that we were looking at nature as the palate cleanser, and nature as this sense of the connections we need for the moment that we're in historically, and then deconstructing and creating abstraction, right? Which is the dance and film legacy of Maya Deren that we wanted to play with, right? So remixing and deconstructing the past with the collected footage, but then also taking us into a new idea. And I'm so excited that we are premiering the film in Colombia. So I'm very delighted that
I sent you last night the link. I don't know if you got it. I know you've been busy putting this together, but I just got word last night. Tiffany came to me and said,
I just want to say one thing. I want to encourage audience members to please put your questions in the chat box, because we will have a question and answer session in the last few minutes of the panel. I'm sorry, Dinorah, for interrupting.
Yeah, Tiffany approached me and said, I want to do a film with belly dancing that takes belly dancing out of that whole commercial sort of sexified space that it so often lives in. So and then the fact that Tiffany and I are both Cuban, and so that's also there. And it's like, okay, so we're working with this music and this dance that comes from this other place, but we know who we are. So like, well, you know what? We've got palm trees, we've got ocean, we've got sort of like the Caribbean here. Can we just put this belly dancing thing in the Caribbean? Like, it's not like belly dancing did not already exist in the Caribbean. We know we have a ton of Turkish and Arab influence in our lineage. It's there. So why not? Like, why not just put that there? Give it that mix.
And to complicate that conversation, and I've said this in many of the panels of the series, this idea of voices from the global South and centering global South voices, and what borders really mean, and borders that change, and borders that are created by men throughout history, and then how dance interrogates and troubles and disrupts these borders. And so I've tried to be super explicit about my positionality as a Cuban American Caribbeanist doing a North African women's dance that has been framed and labeled through all of these systems, right? Created by men, and having the conversation, because it's a complicated conversation that I don't know that anyone has resolved, right? But this idea that of the other, of the way that we are othered, the way that we may other ourselves. And personally, in my dance practice, I've never been interested in that commercial space. I've been interested in the social justice, troubling and disrupting and creating cultural space. And I think that, we all do that in our practice.
And I think, that there's a difference between when you talk about things like appropriation and the purity of the voices of people who should represent whom. I think that there's a difference between political and social representation and artistic representation. That's not to say, but for example, as a Cuban, if I see someone who is doing a particular Cuban art form, Yvonne Daniels, okay? Yvonne Daniels, who is an Afro-Cuban ethnographer, dancer, choreographer, blah, blah, blah. When I see Yvonne dance, and I was her research assistant for her dissertation, which was on Afro-Cuban work. And oftentimes, so she'd come to me and she'd say, well, why are they talking about root vegetables? I'm like, no, Malanga was a musician. So, this kind of things, because she already knew that Malanga was a root vegetable. She didn't know it was also the name of a musician. So, but when I would see Yvonne dance, I would think, damn, she's good. She got it. She went there, she got it. She se le pegó, so when it's art, there's something else going on that I think is not the same as us standing here and saying, I'm going to speak now for the African American community and say this, and this about them. I think when you take an art form into your body, or in my case, into my fingertips, and I edit it into something, that is a different process than doing this, you know?
Yeah. I think, Nejla, I think we spoke about the fact that often perhaps it's in belly dance, but in some cultures, when the other is performing, when the other is enjoying and celebrating, then the other is very well accepted to represent or to practice the dance. There is a fine line. Could you maybe talk a little bit more about that?
I was just kind of listening to Dinorah and thinking about sort of inclusion. Like when you research these different dances, you research deeper and deeper, you always find another branch that connects to another world. Like Middle Eastern dance connects to Indian dance, connects to Gypsy dance, connects to flamenco dance influences contemporary dance, Middle Eastern dance. So African dance also influences belly dancing. So because dance was done by people who traveled throughout the world, I think every bits you go to a place and you put it into your body, and then it changes, and then you go to another place and you present it in your body, and then how the audience receives it changes again. So I feel like everything is connected to everything else. When you dig deeper, we are all a tribe, a big tribe. And so
that Nejla, that makes me think of, because I've been trying to think of how do we explain this. I'm like, it's like a jellyfish, it's like an octopus, it's like these tentacles, like there's no place where it starts, but it keeps connecting and touching. And I remember when I saw Matahari that Live Arts Miami presented, so it's just like this, all of these, connections, just like these tentacles. It made me realize how simple, right? How simple it is that we have all of these connections through a shared humanity, and that culture travels, and that bodies travel, and that dancers embody and drink in everything that's around them, and then it keeps changing. And then in the belly dance world, right, there's this controversial space of this branch called tribal belly dance. And one of the issues is that, some American dancers patented and did like a copywriting of these art forms, and then sell licenses. And, so there's a whole very capitalistic, problematic structure, right, that reappropriates imperialistic structures, right, that most of us are kind of trying to interrogate or break apart and challenge. But I say this because there's a simplicity to the global connection of being an artist and having a body, and knowing that dance, film, it all travels, it all picks up, it all remixes, right? Because society can only move forward if we keep taking ideas and challenging the norms and creating
the evolution
something
of culture.
New. Yeah, the evolution.
Evolution of culture. I mean, when you look, as a visual artist, and I hear you speaking about dance, and obviously that I'm like a wannabe artist, and I'm all up in you guys' world. But as a visual artist, I mean, let's talk about embroidery and weavings and tapestry and fiber work and what the embroidery that you see happening. So today my Uber driver was Jordanian, And he had this mantle with this weaving on it. And I'm like, oh, well, that country is that from Palestine? He said, no, Jordan. I'm like, oh. And he said, no, well, there's a difference in the weaving pattern, blah, 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 but it's similar. So it's this whole thing. And when you look at that, when I looked at this mantle that this Jordanian Uber driver had on the back of the car seat today, it took me back because I was looking at the stitches, because of course my grandmother was a, bordaba. So I was looking at the stitches and I'm like, that square stitch, they do that in Trinidad. I'm from Placeta, so I'm from the center of Cuba. Again, it's a rural environment. I'm from very close to like Remedios and the Escambray Mountains, and the city of Trinidad, which is the colonial city, which is known for its that stuff, the embroidery work, right? And they have this like very special square stitch that they do, that is the stitch that's the one of that town. And this guy's flag from Jordan had this stitch. So, it was like, no, look at that.
Yeah. We have just a few minutes left. We do have one question, but I feel like it's the perfect segue into talking about Nejla's traveling dance project. If you could just take a minute and tell us about how many countries and exactly what this project consists of.
So this was a dream project that I did, started in 2015, where I traveled around the world for a year. Literally every 2 weeks I was in another country and engaging the community in movement, and we created site-specific dances just inspired by the city, the architecture, the plaza, the dancers. And so it was this collective art making in the moment, and the moment it was performed, it was gone. But we also did a documentation of that project, and it was really wonderful to go from country to country and to feel in your body how people experience time, how they deal with traffic, how they move through traffic, how they arrive in the rehearsal space, and how they leave. So it was such a rich experience for me as a dance maker to be going around and working with the world. And so that's one of the other things that it connects me to Maya Deren, the fact that she said that in film she makes the world dance, and I'm in dance, I make the world dance.
She also said art is based on the notion that you will really celebrate an ideal or principle. Deren said you must think, you must plan, you must put yourself completely in a state of devotion.
Yes.
We just, our question is if there's, where we can find these films from Dinorah, from you, Nejla, from Tiffany. Is there a repository? Where can people find these films, your work?
I have a YouTube. Oh, you go.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I have a YouTube page, so they can find a lot of the films there.
And the same with me. I have a website. I have a Vimeo channel. I have a YouTube channel.
Can you put it in the chat?
Yes, I can put it in the chat. So great. I put my my website. So
wonderful. And Tiffany, where can people find?
Yes, at hananarts.org. We have many of our video projects there and performance projects there. And Phoenix, for example, will be touring the Video Danza Film Festival circuit, as well as some other projects that we have in production right now. So it'll travel in that universe, and then we'll make it available.
Wonderful.
Hopefully we'll see it at Screen Dance here in Miami.
Hopefully, let's hope. I want to thank each one of you. This has been so juicy, so wonderful. And I'd like to thank Live Arts Miami and Hanan Arts for all of your support. We have our last Shimmy Shift Pivot next Wednesday, 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Please register. And thank you again. Enjoy your day.
Thank you everyone
so much,
for joining us.
This was awesome. Wonderful to see you again, Nejla, and we're going to get you to Miami.
Yay, wonderful to be with all of you on the panel. Nice to meet you, Dinorah, Gina, and Tiffany, and nice to see you again, Dinorah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Up to you all.
Bye.
Bye.